Welcome back, everyone. So today it is a bit of a fun story because there's a thing that happens whenever a game is way more successful than perhaps the developer actually anticipated, or when a game seems to punch above its weight in a way that ends up confusing perceptions of what really the game should be. Like, say, with Kena Bridge of Spirits, which, had an interesting review situation that we cover on this channel. Well, Valheim was obviously a humongous success, one that actually increased the revenue of Coffee Stain, I think, 12x in that period of time. It's recently had its first early access update called Hearth and Home, and there's been an interesting situation with community feedback on that, and also quite a bit on player expectations, given that we are in the live service world, and, Valheim. It's an indie game, but what happens if it sells as well as a big AAA, and it turns out people kind of have those more AAA expectations and think that money immediately is going to turn into productivity. So let's get into this. Hearth and Home recently launched, and a part of Hearth and Home is that it overhauled how food works, where basically most meals give you a buff to mainly health or stamina rather than a mix of both of them. And this changes how you approach combat. Right? Because basically, blocking and parrying are based on your max health, while movement and attacks are based on stamina, with food now altering one or the other. Now that, according to the devs, means that the players can have more options. As an example, you could really prioritize health food, which would mean that your overall build would be a lot more tanky, or you could prioritize stamina and be more of a DPS. So this is basically a way to get the food, or the game's natural food mechanic, to allow you to kind of spec into tank or DPS. Kinda. So in a way you could say that it's quite an elegant way of dealing with food. And perhaps if the game actually came out with the food system being like this, then it's something that people would have just experienced as a basic part of the game, wouldn't really have questioned too much and would have been happy enough with. However, to some people, this is going to feel like a bit of a nerf based on what they used to have. It's not really went over super well, and a part of it too is that going, tank or DPS could be fine if you're in a party of players, and I think a lot of this game's gameplay has been driven by it being a great game for groups of people to play, play with each other. But for solo players, it can be a little bit more punishing. Right? So it cuts down your options as a solo player. The feedback to this has been a little bit fierce, and because of that, Iron Gate have issued a patch to rebalance the food system back towards the old system. And this is the kind of thing that happens when a game is in early access. Things shift and change. We could get into Darkest Dungeon now, we could do it later.
I think at this point in time, it's so reminiscent of Darkest Dungeon and the problems of being early access that it's worth talking about. Because for anyone who's unfamiliar, Darkest Dungeon was, an early access for a long period of time. It grew and changed a lot during that. But one of the most important things, as I remember it, was, I can't remember which patch or which version it was, but the corpse mechanic where when you kill something in Darkest Dungeon, the corpse remains there and is like a barrier to the movement. It acts as like a thing, so you can't just work your way through it. It is literally an obstacle. That wasn't there originally. But in the patch they added that completely changed how the game felt to existing players who, as far as, I can't remember the name of the studio now, but as far as they were concerned, the early access players are their fans. They're most important people with the most valid feedback. So they were like, okay, yeah, no, we don't like this. Some people did, of course, but a lot of people were like, no, we don't like this. We prefer the game the way it was. You've made us, over with one patch, you've made us completely redress how we approach this game. You've completely rebalanced it all in one movement, and we're not super keen on this. And then, obviously they stuck by their design and went, no, okay, we actually enjoy, we think this is better for the game overall. This fits into our plans, into our goals for the game. But because you feel so strongly about it, there's an option to toggle it. It's not what it'll not be the default, and it's not what we expect you to do, but you can turn it off if you like. And that's a fairly elegant way to do it. But it's just this awful problem of being in early access, and the question of, is the developer right? Are the players with feedback right? Because you get into a really messy situation when you don't listen to players, but also you're making the game, not the players.
Yeah. So I think that's the thing where what you set out with on early access will sort of define where things go, because your early access will find fans who will take the game for what it is at that point. So if you evolve horizontally, you're going to be changing aspects of what that gameplay is, perhaps away from what those players expect. Like the corpses, like the redo of the food system. what players expect is more of a sort of vertical evolution,
Yeah.
right? Or an iteration of the game, rather than anything a little bit more horizontal there in many cases. So that's essentially why, if you're doing early access, a lot of those core gameplay design things are probably worth having quite well locked in. You can see how this rebalance of food is actually a pretty good game design idea, but you can also see how it doesn't really look like something that, you could sort of think is a great new feature or upgrade if you're an existing player who's been enjoying the game the way that it was established and the way that you bought it.
Yeah, that's one of the fun things that often occurs, and it makes me, because obviously, we have the Warcraft channel, we cover MMO stuff. It reminds me an awful lot of MMOs, of MOBAs and fighting games, where players are never happy with a nerf unless something's completely out of control. So you have to buff everything up to make sense. But then you've got the power balance issue where you can see what they've happened here. There's we've just nerfed players and their capabilities and no one's happy about it. Whoops, we have to redress the balance. Yeah. Even if it does seem like a great idea for multiple player situations and stuff like that. It's really quite sad that it's kind of split a little bit. So, I don't want to talk about too much, but Rogue Legacy 2 is a great example of a lot of the changes they've made in early access has kind of annoyed me because I'm this is different now, but also I can kind of see them moving towards a better whole overall.
Yeah.
And it's really difficult to do that and bring all of your players along for the ride because people get attached to what they know and attached to what they like.
Yeah. So unless you have a community manager who is extremely tapped into what the design team is doing and is being extremely communicative, and then things just sort of come out as updates where you're like, okay, here's the update, then the communications can be challenging. Now the other thing then is that this is something that was so popular that it felt like a game made by more people.
Yep.
Because it was just so elegantly designed for the capabilities of its team that they're able to massively punch above their weight. So there's a fair few people saying, oh, look, this took too long to arrive. Other people saying that this doesn't have enough content. And from purely a consumer's perspective, I can kind of understand that. I don't necessarily agree, but I can understand it. Because it's this was a massive success. Surely they would want to capitalize on it and give us more content. Then you've got to think about, the realities of why things have been the way that they have been. And in a minute, we'll be able to tie this into No Man's Sky, actually, because while they're a great story, there was a big lull period before that good story was able to kick off. So it was a commercial success. Does that mean they should be able to pump out more and more content? Well, they're still an indie studio. They were small. There's also the thing of maybe they don't want to become a big studio. There is that bit. But even if they did want to scale up, scaling up takes time, right? So there is the misconception that more money and staff automatically means more output. It doesn't. Because you can actually bring in more staff, but if you don't do it well, that's not going to be great for you. Not at all. Because you'll have people, crossing wires, slowing you down. Now, let's just try to think realistically about timelines here. Valheim was a success. One that really wasn't predictable in its magnitude. So let's just say it's so successful they decide to triple the size of their team. Well, number one, we all know that if you grow too fast, that's going to just blow up in your face. Hiring people is the single most important thing you can do for your business. One bad hire will cause so much damage and will be a real headache to rectify. So, that means you've got to vet your candidates. How are you going to do that? Because I remember when we issued, job roles. It took us 8 hours to do a first pass to get a a very much a short list. There was of 50 or 60. It took so long. And that was time that we could have been making videos or doing anything else, right? Now, if you're in a position like the Valheim people, you're going to have a lot of incredible talent if you're posting job openings. It's going to take a lot of time to actually find a short list of candidates, interview all of those candidates, do everything that you need to actually hire the candidates. Then once they are actually hired and are on the team, well, I guess relocation's not exactly going to be a thing in the current environment. It probably will be work from home, but you still have to get them up to speed. You've got to, if a new programmer comes in and that programmer is going to be working the game, they're going to need to be completely, understanding the code base. Now, what if that programmer, in their technical interview, their technical interview is probably going to be held by the current technical director of the company, who is probably going to be something who otherwise could be doing coding work for the Hearth and Home update. But instead, because they need to prioritize the greater journey of Valheim, well, their time is going to be spent interviewing candidates, finding candidates, getting those candidates up to speed. All of that stuff will slow down work. And then even when you do get people in, it usually takes a good few months for a new member of staff to really get up to speed with all that they're doing. And this all happened in February, while there's also, pandemic and all of that going on. So, yeah, more money can equal more staff, and that should increase more output. But it takes longer than I think people think to actually make all of that happen. Similar happened to Innersloth, the Among Us devs as well, and it could be a situation of people are just quite used to seeing a No Man's Sky sort of cadence and scope of update. People are maybe quite used to the live service games. Expectations have been changed, but then you just have to remember Valheim was made by a truly tiny team, and even for No Man's Sky, they did go dark for a bit, and in that time we know that they grew their team. So, if you just think about all of that, I would expect the content cadence of Valheim to increase and increase and increase. But before it increases, it's going to be slow. Because what's going to make that update cadence increase is growing and building a team. That's one of the most important things you can do. And it does take time to do it right. That's, I think, the situation, probably.
Yeah, that's most of it. It's the idea that they're, realistically, you have to keep in mind that, it's 6 months or so since that was, announced, which is, that seems like, you can make a quarter of a game in that time. Sort of, maybe if you're thinking 2 years for development time. But then you have to think they're not just making the game anymore. They're supporting the game and making the game and trying to grow and do everything at the same time. So they're actually likely less efficient now than they were, in the last year of production. And also, especially for early access games with design problems, they're not in pure content pumping mode. That's one of the things with, people use games that are really successful as sticks to beat other developers for, without completely understanding the kind of intricacies involved. The idea of, because I would absolutely praise Genshin Impact's content cadence any day of the week, but that team is hundreds and hundreds and hundreds large, and they clearly have a really solid pipeline. So I think it's was it PC Gamer, I think their headline for this was, it was live service games have set impossible expectations for indie hits. Or I think that's kind of the most of what's happened here. Expectations have gone up so high by all of the promises of live services that have very rarely been met.
Yeah.
Almost never met. And now everyone's got this really, intentionally driven up idea of, there's so much content for these games. They need to be constantly mono game all the time. But sometimes that just can't happen.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, they are looking for the big next game. The next World of Warcraft that is just their main game.
Yeah,
and
that's true.
It's challenging. So I hope at least with today we've talked about the situation. Design wise, I can see as an interesting design. It's maybe not the direction to go in the immediate. Perhaps there's other pieces of the puzzle that will make that make sense in future updates. But they were actually pretty on the ball.
Yep.
With the player feedback there. But at the very least, I hope we can help to explain why it might take a little bit of time for updates to happen. And it's just that thing. I don't want to just do news with the channel. Yeah. I want to do news, and ideally have people maybe coming away learning one or two more things, or having that sort of other perspective, I suppose. So
yep.
I hope you found that interesting. At the very least. And if you want some more content, there will, of course, be way more content on this channel. So check that out. Have a great day. We'll see you next time.